Have you ever had a crush that felt like, well, like it was more than a crush? You know, a feeling so intense it just completely takes over your world, making it almost impossible to think about anything or anyone else? Well, let's get into it, because today we are pulling back the curtain on the powerful and, let's be honest, often overwhelming science behind that obsessive state.
Right. We've all been there, I think. That feeling of being completely and utterly consumed by someone. It can start as just a little spark, an intriguing thought. But then it quickly grows into this blaze that takes over every single waking moment, coloring your entire world. It is such a frustrating question, isn't it? You know you have other things to do, other people to see, but your mind just keeps circling back to that one person like a moth to a flame. So what is actually going on inside our brains to cause this?
Okay, does any of this sound familiar? You're constantly replaying conversations, analyzing every single text for some kind of hidden meaning, maybe even letting work or your friends slide a little. See, these aren't just signs of a simple crush. They are symptoms of something much more powerful at play. It's an emotional roller coaster, right? Where their attention gives you this incredible high, and their silence just brings these crushing lows.
Well, as it turns out, there's a specific psychological term for this really intense state. It's not just a crush, and it's not quite love. It kind of exists in a category all its own. It's a unique mental state, and it's called limerence. So this term was actually coined way back in 1979 by a psychologist named Dorothy Tennov. She described limerence as this all-consuming, involuntary fixation. Now let's zoom in on the most important part of that definition: the desperate need for reciprocation. That right there, that is the engine driving this entire experience. So let's be super clear here. This is not your average, fun, enjoyable crush that just kind of fades over time. Limerence is often really distressing and incredibly persistent. And here's the biggest difference. While a crush is about getting to know the real person, flaws and all, limerence is totally focused on an idealized version of them. The goal isn't just connection, it's confirmation. It's getting that reciprocation. And this quote just illustrates the fuel for the fire perfectly. Limerence thrives in the gray area of uncertainty. It is the not knowing that creates the obsession. Think about it. If you knew for sure they liked you, or you knew for sure they didn't, the intensity would probably fade. It's the ambiguity that keeps you completely hooked. So let's move from the feeling of it all to the brain and see how this actually builds. Because when you look at the neuroscience, limerence starts to look a lot less like a simple emotion and a whole lot more like a powerful addiction. Now this quote, it actually comes from research on drug addiction, but just listen to how perfectly it describes limerence. Your brain's reward system, yep, the exact same one that responds to things like delicious food or even cocaine, gets completely hijacked by the thought of this one person. What's happening is that your brain can physically change. That core motivation circuit, the part of your brain that screams, I want that, it becomes conditioned to respond to them. Every interaction, every text, every small sign of hope becomes like a hit that your brain starts to crave compulsively. Let's break that down into the two key players. First, you've got dopamine. That is the engine here. It's not really about pleasure or liking, it's all about wanting. It's what drives the craving. Then you have oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It acts like glue, increasing the emotional importance of this person, making every little detail about them feel incredibly significant and absolutely impossible to ignore.
Okay, so that's the brain's chemical hardware. But what about the mental software that's running on it? Why does your mind get so stuck in this obsessive loop? Well, it turns out our brains are wired to absolutely hate loose ends. This is something called the Zeigarnik Effect. Basically, our minds are like little project managers. They keep this running list of unfinished tasks, and those tasks stay top of mind until they are resolved. And an uncertain relationship? That is the ultimate uncompleted task for your brain.
And you can see exactly how that loop works, right? It starts with some kind of ambiguous text or a confusing conversation. Your brain immediately flags this social story as incomplete. That kicks off the compulsive mental replay where you analyze it from every single angle. And because you don't have a clear answer, your brain just starts filling in the blanks with daydreams and fantasies of the outcome you really want. Now, this obsessive loop can be especially powerful for people with an anxious attachment style. For them, the fear of abandonment is really profound. So constantly thinking about the person isn't just an obsession. It can feel like this desperate attempt to mentally stay close and watch for any tiny sign that you might be left behind. So we've covered the what and the why of this whole intense experience. But now let's get to the most important part. what can you actually do about it? The good news is just understanding the mechanics of limerence is the very first step to dismantling it. Honestly, the most critical first step is simply awareness. Realizing that what you're feeling isn't some magical, destined, soulmate level love, but a predictable psychological state called limerence is just incredibly empowering. It takes the power away from the feeling and gives it back to you. It reduces the shame and lets you see the situation with some much needed clarity.
From that point of awareness, the steps to break the cycle become a lot clearer. First, you acknowledge what it is. Next, and this is the hardest part, you have to set boundaries. Limiting or cutting off contact starves the addiction of its fuel. Then, you have to consciously refocus that massive amount of mental energy you've been spending back onto yourself, your goals, your friends, your life. And finally, don't be afraid to seek help, because therapy can be an absolute game changer in this process.
A particularly effective therapy is something called exposure and response prevention, or ERP. This is where you intentionally face the uncertainty head on. So, for example, you feel that intense, overwhelming urge to check their social media for clues. With ERP, you acknowledge that urge, you feel the anxiety, and you choose not to act on it. You put the phone down. Over time, this actually retrains your brain to tolerate the discomfort, and that is what finally breaks the obsessive cycle. So, I want to leave you with this question. Understanding limerence really shows us just how much our brains can treat an intense human connection like a powerful and, potentially addictive substance. It really forces us to ask, where is that incredibly fine line between profound love and profound addiction?